Sometimes the cruelest thing a room can do is make one person feel as though she was never meant to exist inside it. Emily Carter understood that truth before the first course was served. Blackwood Castle blazed with candlelight against the winter darkness, its ancient stone walls dressed in crimson banners, while snow pressed silently against the towering windows. Beneath chandeliers crowded with hundreds of trembling flames, vampire nobles gathered around long oak tables heavy with silver plates, roasted game, dark fruit, and crystal goblets. Their pale faces gleamed beneath the warm light, beautiful and cold, while human dignitaries sat among them in embroidered coats and velvet gowns. Emily wore neither silk nor jewels. Her plain blue dress had been mended twice at the sleeves, and the small silver pendant beneath her collar was the only thing she owned that had once belonged to her father. She had spent most of the evening helping servants carry bread from the kitchens, never expecting old Thomas Reed, the castle steward, to quietly tell her that her name had been placed among the invited guests. "Your father earned you a place here," he had whispered. Emily had almost laughed. Her father had been dead for 11 years, leaving behind debts, a ruined cottage, and a name people in the surrounding villages spoke with uncomfortable pauses. Yet she obeyed Thomas and entered the great hall. That was when Lady Victoria Ashford saw her. The vampire noblewoman's porcelain face remained perfectly composed as her gaze traveled from Emily's worn shoes to the silver pendant at her throat. Something changed in Victoria's eyes. Recognition, then fear. It vanished so quickly Emily wondered if she had imagined it. "There appears to be an error," Victoria announced. Conversations softened around them. Emily stopped beside an empty chair halfway down the western table. "Lady Ashford?" Thomas asked carefully. Victoria touched the chair before Emily could sit. "This table is reserved for noble blood." Heat climbed Emily's face. She could feel dozens of eyes turning toward her. Thomas opened his mouth, but Emily gently shook her head. She would not make an old man fight a battle that belonged to her. "Where would you have me sit?" she asked. Victoria glanced toward the farthest wall, where a tiny and used table stood beside a drafty archway leading toward the servants' corridor. There, a few guests smiled behind their goblets. Emily walked across the hall alone. Each step seemed louder than the orchestra. She reached the little table, pulled out its single chair, and sat with her back straight. When a servant nervously brought her bread and stew, Emily thanked him as though she had been seated at the finest table in Europe. Then she noticed a young kitchen boy hovering near the doorway, staring hungrily at the untouched loaf beside her plate. Emily broke it in half and slipped one piece into his hands. "Eat before it gets cold," she whispered. She never noticed the man watching from the raised table at the opposite end of the hall. King Adrian Blackwood had noticed everything. He sat beneath the carved crest of his ancient house, motionless in black velvet and silver, his face unnaturally pale even among his own kind. For centuries, men had lowered their eyes when his gaze touched them. Tonight, his gray eyes remained fixed on the human woman beside the wall. Not because she had been humiliated, because she had been humiliated and still found someone poorer than herself to feed. Adrian slowly set down his goblet. "Why?" the vampire king asked, his quiet voice somehow silencing the nearest tables. "Is that woman sitting alone?" Lady Victoria's fingers tightened around her glass. "Because, Your Majesty," she answered. "No table in this hall would have her." Adrian looked at Emily for a long moment. Then the most powerful vampire in the kingdom pushed back his chair, lifted his own silver dinner plate with both hands, and stepped down from the royal dais. King Adrian Blackwood descended from the royal dais carrying his own dinner, and before he had taken 3 steps, the great hall became so silent that Emily could hear the fire crackling inside the distant hearth. She did not notice him at first. Her attention remained on the kitchen boy retreating through the servants' archway with half her bread hidden beneath his coat. But everyone else noticed. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Goblets hovered above pale lips. Even the musicians faltered until the last trembling note of a violin disappeared beneath the vaulted ceiling. A king did not carry his own plate. A vampire king certainly did not abandon the royal table to cross a crowded hall for a penniless human woman. Yet Adrian continued walking. His black cloak moved behind him like a shadow, silver embroidery catching flashes of candlelight with every measured step. Nobody dared speak. Emily finally sensed the change in the room and lifted her eyes. Her breath caught. The vampire king was coming directly toward her. Instinct told her to stand. She pushed back her chair so quickly its wooden legs scraped against the stone. "Your Majesty." She bowed, confused and suddenly aware of every patch in her dress. Adrian stopped beside the empty chair opposite her. His pale gray eyes rested on her face before dropping briefly to the modest bowl of stew on her table. "Sit." Emily hesitated. "Have I done something wrong?" Something almost resembling amusement touched his expression. "Not yet." Then Adrian pulled out the empty chair and sat down. A whisper rippled through the hall like wind through dead leaves. Emily stared at him. Adrian calmly placed his silver plate beside her chipped clay bowl, unfolded his black napkin, and looked toward the royal dais as though sitting beside an impoverished human woman were the most ordinary decision he had made in 300 years. Lady Victoria had gone completely still. "Your Majesty," she finally said, rising from her place. "Surely there has been a misunderstanding." Adrian turned his head. There was. Relief flickered across Victoria's face. "I knew. I was told no table in this hall would have her." His voice remained quiet. "That made it worse. So I have corrected the misunderstanding." Several nobles lowered their eyes. Victoria did not. "She has no standing here." Adrian glanced at the long tables filled with jeweled guests, then back at Emily. "Neither does kindness, apparently. Yet I find myself unwilling to banish that from my hall." Emily's cheeks burned, but not from shame this time. "Your Majesty, you needn't do this for me." Adrian studied her. "You think I am doing this for you, aren't you?" "No," he lifted his goblet. "I am doing it because everyone in this room saw something cruel happen and decided comfort was more important than objecting to it." His gaze swept across the hall. Nobody moved. "You merely gave me the opportunity to discover who they were." Emily looked at him differently then, not as the ancient creature villagers warned children about, but as a man who had noticed what everyone else had chosen to ignore. Adrian turned back to her. "Emily Carter, is it?" Her heart stumbled. She had never told him her name. "Yes." His fingers stopped against the stem of his goblet. "Carter." The word came slowly. Something cold entered his eyes. "Who was your father?" Emily swallowed. "William Carter, Your Majesty." The goblet touched the table with a sharp click. Across the hall, Lady Victoria went pale. Adrian stared at Emily as though the room around them had vanished. "William Carter died 11 years ago." Emily's breath caught. "You knew him?" Before Adrian could answer, the silver pendant beneath her collar slipped free and struck the edge of the table. Adrian's gaze dropped to it. For the first time that night, the vampire king looked genuinely shaken. "Where," he whispered, "did you get that?" Emily instinctively reached for the pendant, but Adrian's hand moved first. "Don't." The single word stopped her fingers inches from the silver. Around them, the banquet remained unnaturally quiet. Emily could feel hundreds of eyes fixed upon their small table, yet Adrian seemed to have forgotten every guest in the hall. His attention belonged entirely to the object resting against the faded blue fabric of her dress. It was an old silver medallion, no larger than a coin, darkened by age and engraved with a tree surrounded by 7 tiny stars. Emily had worn it every day since her father died. To her, it had never been anything more than the last piece of William Carter she still possessed. To the vampire king, it appeared to be something else entirely. "Where did you get it?" Adrian repeated. "My father gave it to me. When? The night before he died." Something flickered behind Adrian's pale gray eyes. "Did he tell you what it was?" Emily shook her head. "He said only that I should never sell it, no matter how hungry I became." A faint, bitter smile touched her lips. There were winters when that became difficult advice to follow. Adrian did not smile. Slowly, almost cautiously, he extended his hand. "May I?" Emily hesitated before lifting the chain over her head and placing the pendant in his palm. The instant the silver touched his skin, warmth flashed through it. Adrian froze. Emily stared. Thin lines of golden light appeared inside the ancient engraving, first outlining the tree, then spreading toward the 7 stars. A collective gasp swept through the hall. Adrian closed his fingers around the pendant, but the glow escaped between them. "Impossible," someone whispered. Lady Victoria rose so abruptly that her chair toppled backward. "Your Majesty, put it down." Adrian looked toward her. The fear on Victoria's face was unmistakable now. Why? He asked. It may be cursed. You recognized it. I recognized nothing. Adrian's expression hardened. You were frightened of Emily before you ever saw this pendant clearly. Victoria's lips parted, but no answer came. Emily looked between them, her confusion sharpening into unease. What is happening? Adrian opened his hand again. The golden light had begun fading, leaving the pendant ordinary and tarnished once more. This is not jewelry, he said. It is a seal. Emily's stomach tightened. A seal for what? Adrian turned it over. Beneath decades of scratches, symbols were carved around the rim. So small Emily had always mistaken them for decoration. House Carter, Adrian murmured. Several older vampires exchanged alarmed looks. Emily frowned. My family has no house. Not anymore. Adrian's voice had become strangely distant. Your family name was removed from every royal record 11 years ago. Emily felt the room tilt beneath her. Why? Before Adrian could answer, Lady Victoria stepped away from the western table. Because William Carter was a traitor. Emily stood so fast her bowl overturned, stew spreading across the table. My father was no traitor. He conspired against the crown, Victoria said. That is why his name was erased. Emily looked desperately at Adrian. The Vampire King said nothing. That silence hurt more than Victoria's accusation. You knew him, Emily whispered. Adrian's jaw tightened. Yes. Then tell them. Emily, tell them my father wasn't a traitor. Adrian looked down at the glowing seal in his palm, and when his eyes returned to hers, they carried something she had not expected from an immortal king. Doubt. I cannot, he said quietly, because 11 years ago, William Carter was accused of trying to kill me. For 11 years, Emily had believed the worst thing death could steal was the chance to say goodbye. Now, standing beneath the cold gaze of an entire vampire court, she discovered it could steal the truth as well. Trying to kill you, she repeated, barely recognizing her own voice. Adrian remained beside the small table, her father's silver seal resting in his pale hand. That was the accusation. And you believed it? Emily asked. Lady Victoria answered before he could. The evidence was overwhelming. William Carter gained access to the Eastern Tower on the night assassins entered Blackwood Castle. 3 guards were found unconscious, a royal passage had been opened, and Carter disappeared before dawn. He came home before dawn, Emily said. The memory arrived suddenly. Her father stumbling through their cottage door soaked by rain, his coat torn, his face exhausted. She had been 12. He had knelt before her, pressed the pendant into her hand, and made her promise never to surrender it. By sunset the following day, he was dead. He told me we had to leave, she whispered. He said someone powerful would come looking for him. Victoria's expression tightened. Convenient words from a guilty man. Emily turned toward her. You knew who I was the moment you saw me. Silence. That is why you moved me away from everyone. Victoria's eyes hardened. Mind yourself, girl. Answer her. Adrian's voice was quiet, but every candle nearest him flickered. Victoria looked toward the throne as if suddenly remembering who truly ruled the castle. I recognized a resemblance, she admitted. Nothing more. Adrian studied her for several seconds before turning to the guards. Seal the hall. Heavy doors slammed shut. A nervous murmur spread among the guests. Emily's pulse quickened. Your Majesty? Adrian placed the pendant carefully on the table. Until I know why a supposedly erased royal seal has awakened in my hand, no one leaves. Emily stared at him. Including me? His gaze met hers. Especially you. The word struck harder than she expected. Only minutes earlier, this man had crossed an entire hall because strangers had humiliated her. Now suspicion had rebuilt the distance between them. 2 guards approached, but Adrian raised one hand. She is not a prisoner. Give her a chamber in the western wing. She will be treated as my guest. A guest who cannot leave? Emily asked. A protected witness whose identity may have just placed her in danger. Or a suspect. Adrian did not lie to comfort her. Until I know the truth, both possibilities exist. Emily lifted her chin. Then find it. Something changed in his expression. Most humans pleaded when Vampire King Adrian Blackwood doubted them. Emily Carter challenged him to prove himself wrong. I intend to, he said. Thomas Reed stepped forward from among the servants. His weathered face had lost its color. Your Majesty, there may be something you should see. Adrian turned. What? Thomas glanced nervously toward Victoria. The original record from the night of the assassination. Victoria's goblet slipped from her fingers and shattered against the floor. Thomas swallowed. The official chronicle has pages missing, sire. But years ago, before they disappeared, I made a copy. Adrian became utterly still. Where is it? Hidden beneath the old chapel. Victoria moved suddenly toward the doors. The guards blocked her path. Adrian's eyes followed her, cold understanding beginning to replace suspicion. Then he looked back at Emily. It appears, he said, closing his fingers around the Carter seal. Someone has been afraid of your father's name for a very long time. Emily had expected captivity to feel like iron bars. Instead, it felt like a beautiful room, with a door she was forbidden to cross. Her chamber in the western wing overlooked snow-covered forests stretching beyond Blackwood Castle, and servants brought her warm meals, clean dresses, and more firewood than her family had once burned in an entire winter. Yet every kindness reminded her that she could not go home. For 3 days, Adrian's guards searched the old chapel while Thomas tried to locate the hidden records, and for 3 nights, the Vampire King came to Emily after the castle had fallen quiet. The first time, she found him standing outside her door rather than entering without permission. "May I?" he asked. Emily almost laughed at the absurdity of a king requesting permission inside his own castle. Would it matter if I said no? Adrian's pale face remained unreadable. Yes. That answer surprised her enough to step aside. He entered carrying no guards, no crown, only her father's silver seal. "It has not reacted again," he said, placing it on the table between them. "Perhaps it dislikes you." Adrian looked at her, and for the briefest instant, amusement softened his ancient features. Most sensible objects do. It was the first time Emily realized the feared Vampire King possessed a sense of humor. Their conversations grew longer after that. Adrian asked about William Carter, not as an interrogator, but as someone trying to assemble a man from fragments. Emily told him about her father teaching her to mend fishing nets, giving away flour to hungry neighbors even when their own cupboards were nearly empty, and singing badly whenever thunderstorms frightened her. Adrian listened without interruption. In return, Emily asked questions nobody at court seemed brave enough to ask him. "Do you enjoy being king?" Adrian stared into the fire. "Enjoyment has very little to do with kingship." "That sounds like no." It was. She learned that Adrian had ruled for more than 2 centuries, that he remembered wars whose names had disappeared from human maps, and that betrayal had taught him to trust evidence before affection. He learned that Emily wanted neither wealth nor a title. "If your father is proven innocent, what will you ask of me?" he questioned one night. "Nothing." Adrian frowned. "Everyone wants something." "Then restore his name." "Land. Gold." "His name," she repeated. "That is all." Adrian studied her as if she had spoken a language older than his kingdom. Something between them shifted that night. Not love. Not yet. Something quieter. Respect. The next evening he brought her a book because she had mentioned missing the village school. The evening after that, she found him standing at her window while snow covered the battlements. "You keep coming back," Emily said. "Does that concern you?" "It confuses me." Adrian turned toward her. Candlelight sharpened the unnatural pallor of his face. "You confuse me as well." Before Emily could answer, the chamber door burst open. Thomas stumbled inside, breathing hard, clutching a leather-bound ledger against his chest. Adrian moved instantly between him and Emily. "What happened?" "I found it." Thomas placed the ledger on the table with trembling hands. "The missing testimony from 11 years ago." Adrian opened it. His eyes moved across the faded writing, then stopped. The silence became unbearable. "What does it say?" Emily whispered. Adrian slowly lifted his gaze. Whatever uncertainty he had carried for 11 years was gone. "Your father did enter the eastern tower that night," he said. Emily's heart sank. Then Adrian turned the page. "But he did not open the passage for my assassins." His eyes hardened into something colder than winter. He entered it to stop them. The truth had been buried for 11 years, but once Adrian began reading aloud, it seemed to tear through Blackwood Castle like a blade drawn across old silk. The missing testimony belonged to Sir Edmund Hale, captain of the Eastern Guard on the night of the assassination attempt. His faded handwriting described 3 masked figures entering through a concealed passage beneath the Eastern Tower, carrying silver weapons, and wearing the insignia of a noble house beneath their cloaks. William Carter had discovered them by accident. He had not opened the passage. He had followed them. Alone. He warned the guards. Adrian read, his voice becoming colder with every line. When they failed to respond, he entered the tower and confronted the intruders himself. Emily gripped the edge of the table. For years, she had remembered her father coming home wounded and terrified. Now she finally understood why. Thomas turned several pages. There is more, Your Majesty. Adrian read the final testimony in silence. His face changed. What? Emily whispered. Adrian looked at Thomas. Leave us. Thomas bowed and withdrew. The door closed. Adrian remained motionless beside the fire, the ledger open in his hands. The assassins belonged to House Ashford. Emily felt the words before she understood them. Victoria's family? Her father commanded them. Adrian's jaw tightened. The Ashfords wanted the human villages removed from royal protection. My death would have placed my cousin on the throne, and he had already promised them control of those lands. Emily thought of Lady Victoria recognizing her across the banquet hall. The fear, the humiliation, the desperate attempt to make her disappear into the servants' corridor. She knew. Yes. Adrian turned another page. Your father survived the tower and gave his testimony to Captain Hale. Before it could reach me, Hale disappeared. The official chronicle was altered. William was declared the conspirator instead. Emily's eyes burned, but she refused to cry. And my father? Adrian hesitated. That hesitation told her enough. Say it. The record suggests Ashford agents followed him home. Emily closed her eyes. 11 years of whispers returned at once. Traitor's daughter. Murderer's blood. Doors closed in her face. Work refused. Neighbors who once loved her father suddenly afraid to speak his name. They destroyed him twice, she said. First they took his life. Then they took the reason he died. Adrian stepped closer, fury burning behind his pale eyes. I will summon Victoria before sunrise. And then, she will answer for what her house did. How? Adrian's expression became frighteningly calm. As my law permits. Emily looked at him and suddenly understood what centuries of absolute power could do when grief became anger. No, Adrian stared at her. No. You suspected my father because records told you. 2. Now another record tells you Victoria is guilty, and you are ready to condemn her before morning. This testimony was hidden because her family feared it. Then prove it publicly. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Emily, they destroyed your family. Which is exactly why I will not become them. Silence filled the chamber. Emily stepped toward the vampire king, though every instinct warned her against challenging something so ancient and powerful. Give her a trial. Bring the original records before humans and vampires. Let everyone hear what happened. If my father's name is restored only because an angry king commands people to believe him, then his name still belongs to the throne, not to the truth. Adrian stared at her for a long time. Then the fury in his eyes slowly changed into something deeper. Respect. You are asking me to show mercy to your enemy. Emily shook her head. No, I'm asking you to show justice. And for perhaps the first time in centuries, the vampire king bowed his head to a human woman and listened. By sunrise, every noble in Blackwood Castle knew the vampire king had discovered something powerful enough to shake one of the oldest houses in his kingdom, but only 4 people knew that Emily Carter had stopped him from passing judgment in anger. Adrian ordered the great hall prepared for a public hearing 3 days later, then summoned messengers from the surrounding human villages and representatives from every vampire house under his rule. No secret chamber, no private punishment, no whispered verdict that could later be rewritten. Emily had demanded the truth be seen, and Adrian intended to make certain no one could bury it again. Lady Victoria remained confined to her chambers under guard, but when Adrian informed her that she would receive a formal hearing, she laughed. The human girl has softened you. Adrian stood before her door, his face pale and unreadable. No, she reminded me that power without restraint is merely another form of fear. Victoria's smile vanished. Meanwhile, Thomas and the royal archivist searched through sealed records beneath the chapel. They found tax ledgers, guard rotations, letters bearing the Ashford crest, and payments made to 3 mercenaries shortly before the assassination attempt. Each discovery tightened the case, yet Emily refused to celebrate. She spent those days in the Western Library reading every document Adrian allowed her to see. On the second night, he found her asleep over a stack of records, her cheek resting against her folded arm. A candle had nearly burned to its base. Adrian quietly moved it away and placed his cloak over her shoulders. Emily woke instantly. "You know I have a bed. I was beginning to suspect you had declared war on sleep." She sat up and noticed the cloak. "You did this before." "Did what?" "Tried to protect me without asking." Adrian was silent. Emily softened. "I'm not angry. That may be worse." She almost smiled, but the expression faded when she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. "Why does this matter so much to you?" Adrian looked toward the dark windows. "Because I failed your father. You didn't know. A king is responsible for what is done beneath his crown, including what he fails to see." Emily studied him. For the first time, she understood that his anger at Victoria was only partly about betrayal. The rest was guilt. "Then don't make this about paying a debt to me." Adrian turned back. "What should I make it about?" "Making sure it can't happen to someone else." The words settled between them. Adrian approached the table and placed William Carter's pendant beside the records. "If the court clears his name, I can restore his land. His title, everything taken from your family." Emily shook her head. "Restore what belonged to him legally. But don't give me favors because you feel guilty. Most people spend their lives trying to gain a king's favor. Then you've met too many people who want something from you." Adrian's gaze held hers. "And what do you want from me, Emily?" Her heartbeat quickened, but her answer remained steady. "I want you to be the king you claim to be when no one is brave enough to challenge you." For a moment, neither moved. Then Adrian lowered his head, not as a monarch granting mercy, but as a man accepting a truth he needed to hear. "Very well." At noon the next day, bells rang. Across Blackwood Castle, humans entered through the western gates. Vampire nobles entered through the east. At the center of the great hall stood the same small table where Emily had once been forced to sit alone. This time, Adrian had ordered it placed directly before his throne. And when Lady Victoria Ashford was escorted into the hall, she looked at that table and finally understood. The woman she had tried to make invisible was about to become the one person everyone had come to hear. The second banquet began without music because Adrian wanted every person in Blackwood Castle to hear the truth without distraction. Humans filled the western side of the great hall, vampire nobles occupied the east, and between them stood the little wooden table where Emily Carter had been humiliated only days earlier. This time, Emily sat there by choice. Lady Victoria Ashford stood before the throne with 2 guards behind her, her porcelain face composed despite the evidence stacked on the table beside Emily. Adrian rose. His black robes fell around him like midnight, his pale face colder than the snow beyond the windows. 11 years ago, William Carter was named a traitor to this crown, he said. Tonight, that judgment will be examined before those who inherited its consequences. Thomas stepped forward first. He presented Captain Hale's copied testimony, explaining where it had been hidden and why he had preserved it. Then came the royal archivists with guard records showing that William had entered the Eastern Tower after the hidden passage had already been opened. A surviving ledger revealed payments from House Ashford to 3 mercenaries whose descriptions matched the assassins. Finally, Adrian placed Emily's silver pendant on the table. The Carter seal was issued generations ago to families entrusted with protecting the passageways beneath this castle. William Carter did not need to break into the Eastern Tower. He had lawful authority to enter it. A murmur swept through the human delegates. Victoria lifted her chin. Documents can be forged. Emily rose. Yes, she said calmly. That is exactly how my father became a traitor. The room went still. Victoria's eyes flashed. You dare accuse my house? I don't need to. Emily gestured toward the records. Your own house kept the evidence. Thomas produced the final document, a letter discovered inside a sealed Ashford account book, written by Victoria's father and ordering Captain Hale's testimony removed before it reached the king. The Ashford seal remained pressed into the wax. Victoria stared at it, and for the first time, her composure broke. My father did what was necessary to preserve our kind. Adrian descended from the throne. By murdering the human who saved your king, humans were becoming too powerful. No, Emily said. You were afraid they might become equal. Victoria turned toward her with naked contempt. And now you think sitting beside a king makes you equal to us? Emily met her gaze. No, being born did that. Silence followed, deeper than any Adrian could have commanded. He looked across both halves of the hall. By the authority of the crown, William Carter is cleared of every accusation against him. His lands and family name will be restored. House Ashford will surrender the property taken from the Carter estate and compensate every human family displaced through its conspiracy. Lady Victoria will lose her seat on the Royal Council and stand judgment under the same laws she believed beneath her. He paused, then looked toward the divided tables. But this did not begin 11 years ago, and it does not end with one guilty house. A kingdom teaches people their worth through the customs it permits. His eyes moved to the little table. Days ago, a woman was seated apart because of her blood, and nearly everyone here accepted it. Several nobles lowered their heads. That custom ends tonight. From this hour forward, no table in Blackwood Castle will be divided by human or vampire blood. An older vampire rose angrily. You would discard centuries of tradition for one woman. Adrian's expression never changed. A law that requires humiliation to preserve order deserves neither obedience nor preservation. No one challenged him again. Servants began moving the tables together. Wood scraped across ancient stone as the physical division of. Generations disappeared before Emily's eyes. Adrian approached her, but he did not offer his hand or ask her to join him at the throne. He simply stood beside the little table and waited. Emily understood. The first time, he had chosen where to sit. This time, the choice belonged to her. 1 year later, the little wooden table still stood in the great hall of Blackwood Castle, though no one had been forced to sit there since the night the old laws changed. Emily had asked why Adrian kept it. He had only said, "Some things should remain where we can see them." Much had changed in 12 months. William Carter's name had been restored to the royal record, his confiscated land returned to Emily, and a stone memorial now stood in the village square describing him not as a traitor, but as the man who had saved the king. Lady Victoria Ashford had received the public trial Emily demanded. She was stripped of her council seat and noble privileges, while House Ashford's seized wealth compensated the families harmed by its conspiracy. More importantly, humans now served openly on the royal council. Emily was among them, elected by the surrounding villages rather than appointed by Adrian, a distinction she had insisted upon. She still wore simple dresses. She still carried her father's silver pendant. And she still disagreed with the vampire king often enough to make half his council nervous. Adrian seemed to enjoy that most of all. On the first anniversary of William Carter's exoneration, Blackwood Castle held a banquet celebrating the new covenant between humans and vampires. There were no Eastern and Western tables now. Farmers sat beside nobles. Human children laughed beneath ancient vampire portraits. The room was imperfect, awkward, occasionally tense, but no one sat apart because of blood. Emily entered late after settling an argument between two village delegates and stopped when she saw Adrian standing beside his throne. He looked exactly as he had a year earlier. Black clothing, dark hair, skin unnaturally pale beneath the candlelight. But she no longer saw a creature carved from winter. She saw the man who brought books to her room, who listened when she challenged him, and who had learned that protecting someone did not mean choosing for them. Beside his throne stood an empty chair. Adrian descended the steps. The hall quieted out of habit. "Emily Carter," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dangerously formal." A few guests laughed. Adrian almost smiled. "Would you sit beside me?" Emily looked at the chair, then at the little table against the wall. 1 year ago, an entire room had decided where she belonged. Adrian had crossed that room and sat beside her, but even kindness had made the choice for her. Tonight was different. "Only if you promise me something," she said. "Name it. Never decide where I belong again." Adrian's expression softened. "Then choose." Emily looked around the hall. At Thomas smiling near the fireplace. At villagers sharing wine with vampires who once refused to acknowledge them. At her father's restored crest hanging among the banners of honored houses. Finally, she looked at Adrian. She took the empty chair herself, dragged it away from the throne, and placed it beside his seat at the long common table below the dais. "Here." Adrian stared at the chair, then laughed quietly. The sound startled several nobles more than any royal command ever had. He left his throne and followed her. They sat together among everyone else, and when Adrian reached beneath the table, he did not take Emily's hand. He turned his palm upward and waited. Emily smiled and placed her hand in his. There were no hidden conspiracies left between them, no unpaid debts, no erased names, no question of whether she stayed because a king commanded it. She stayed because she chose him, and Adrian loved her enough to understand the difference. Months later, when they married beneath the bells of Blackwood Castle, the little table remained against the wall as a reminder of the night everything began. Once, it had represented humiliation. Now it represented a choice that changed a kingdom. One lonely woman refused to surrender her dignity, and one powerful king decided that sitting beside her mattered more than sitting above everyone else. A throne could command a kingdom, but it could never command a heart too. Stay?